What if the woman standing at the altar wasn't the bride at all, but someone wearing her face like a borrowed coat? That question never would have crossed Marigold Okafor's mind if she hadn't spent 3 weeks memorizing every detail of a face that, up close, on the morning of the wedding, suddenly didn't add up. Marigold ran a flower shop on the south side of Chicago, the kind with a hand-painted sign and a bell over the door that stuck halfway open in humid weather. She was 31, built soft and round, in a way the world had spent her whole life telling her to apologize for, and she had exactly one talent that mattered to her. She noticed things, not gossip, not drama, details. The way a stem curved wrong before it snapped. The way a room felt different, the second before something in it changed. She had been noticing things about Catherine Voss for 3 weeks, and none of them sat right. The contract had come out of nowhere, a phone call from a coordinator representing the Esposito family, asking if Marigold's shop could handle the floral design for a wedding that would unite 2 of the city's most influential families. Roman Esposito didn't run a shipping company on paper, but everyone in Chicago understood what ran underneath the paperwork. Marigold had nearly hung up, certain it was a prank, until the deposit landed in her account an hour later, large enough to cover 6 months of overdue rent in one transfer. She met Roman Esposito for the first time in a downtown conference room that smelled like leather and money. He was tall, dark-eyed, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her shop's annual lease, and he barely looked at the floral mock-ups before looking directly at her instead. "You designed the centerpiece with the broken stem pattern," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did. It's supposed to look like growth pushing through something that tried to stop it." Something shifted behind his eyes, brief and unreadable. "Most people send me flowers that look like apologies. You sent me something that looks like a fight." He nodded once. "You're hired." For the next 3 weeks, Marigold buried herself in the wedding, building an arch of white, peonies, and trailing ivy, meant to overlook Lake Michigan, from the Esposito Estate's private terrace. She barely slept. She barely noticed her own exhaustion. What she did notice, almost against her will, was Catherine. The bride was beautiful, in the practiced, photographed way of women raised to be looked at. Dark hair, always perfectly set. Expression, always composed. But 3 separate times that week, Marigold watched her flinch when Roman touched her shoulder. A small, involuntary recoil, gone almost as fast as it appeared. Once, she saw a faded bruise along Catherine's wrist, quickly covered by a bracelet, the moment she noticed Marigold's eyes drift there. And every evening, Catherine disappeared to a private corner of the garden to take a phone call she clearly didn't win. Catherine. Samotif, le channerly to answers. Her voice dropping into something low and frightened that didn't match the confident woman who smiled for photographers an hour later. Marigold told herself it wasn't her business. Jittery bride was hardly unusual. Pre-wedding nerves explained almost anything if you wanted them to. Then, 4 days before the ceremony, she found the makeup case. She had been delivering a sample bouquet to the bridal suite when she noticed the bathroom door standing open and a leather case sitting on the counter, half unzipped. Marigold wasn't looking for anything. She simply glanced in passing, the way anyone glances at an open door, and stopped cold. Inside the case sat several small pots of theatrical scar wax, a tube of skin-matching concealer in 3 different tones, and a set of photographs clipped together with a binder ring. Photographs showed Catherine Voss, but not the Catherine Marigold had spent 3 weeks watching float gracefully through the estate. This Catherine had a faint scar along her jaw, slightly different cheekbones, a gap between her front teeth that the woman currently engaged to Roman Esposito did not have. Beneath the photographs sat a small voice recorder. Marigold knew she should leave immediately. Instead, with trembling fingers, she pressed play. The woman's voice filled the small bathroom, practicing inflections, repeating phrases in Catherine's exact cadence. "I love you, Roman." Pause. Again, softer. "I love you, Roman." Then, In a completely different, colder voice, the recording continued. Tell Markovic the substitution held through the rehearsal dinner. We move at the reception, during the toast. Confirm the access codes are still live on the West Gate. Marigold's blood turned to ice. This wasn't a nervous bride. This wasn't even Catherine Voss. Whoever stood at that altar in 4 days wearing Catherine's face was someone else entirely. Someone trained to imitate her, down to the exact pitch of her voice. Sent by a name, Marigold. Recognized only because Chicago newspapers occasionally whispered it in connection with territory wars on the West Side. Markovic. She fumbled her phone out and photographed everything, hands shaking so badly, the first 3 pictures came out blurred. A door clicked somewhere down the hallway, and Marigold shoved the phone into her apron pocket and slipped out of the suite seconds before footsteps rounded the corner. She spent that entire night awake in her shop, surrounded by buckets of unfinished centerpieces, trying to convince herself she had misunderstood something. People rehearsed wedding vows sometimes, didn't they? Maybe the photographs belonged to a stylist preparing the bride's look. Maybe the second voice on the recording belonged to someone else entirely, unrelated to anything sinister. The word access codes kept circling back through her mind, refusing to settle into anything innocent. Next morning, she returned to the estate, determined to say nothing, and let the wedding industry professionals handle whatever they were trained to handle, which was certainly not impersonation plots involving rival crime families. That plan lasted exactly until she passed the garden pavilion and heard the woman wearing Catherine's face speaking in that same cold, unfamiliar voice she'd heard on the recorder. This time live, this time real. The toast happens at 7 exactly, the woman was saying into her phone, her back to the hedges, unaware anyone stood close enough to hear. Roman always raises his glass first. The moment he does, I'll be standing close enough that nobody questions it. After that, it's clean. Markovic gets the Westport routes without a single bullet fired, and everyone blames a heart condition nobody knew the real Catherine had. The real Catherine. Marigold's stomach dropped through the floor. Wherever the actual Catherine Voss was right now, this woman clearly wasn't worried about her surfacing to contradict the story. She backed away from the hedge so quickly, she nearly tripped over a coil of garden hose, catching herself against a trellis hard enough to scrape her palm. She didn't stop moving until she reached the side entrance of the main house, her heart hammering so violently she could feel it in her throat. She needed to tell someone. She needed to tell Roman. But Roman Esposito was a man who commanded armed guards with a single glance, a man whose organization existed because betrayal in his world ended in violence, not lawsuits. She walked up to him with nothing but a blurry photograph and a stolen recording. She was wrong about any piece of it. She wouldn't just lose the wedding contract. She might not walk away from that conversation at all. For 2 days, she tried and failed to find a private moment with him. Security surrounded him constantly as the wedding approached. Lawyers, family members, men in dark suits who spoke to him in hushed, urgent tones that made it clear something already had his full attention. Marigold had no way of knowing if it was related to what she'd found. On the morning of the wedding itself, with guests already arriving in long black cars that wound up the estate's private drive, Marigold finally cornered a moment alone with him near the floral arch overlooking the lake. "Mr. Esposito," she said, her voice shaking despite every effort to steady it. "I need to tell you something. And I think it's going to sound insane, but I need you to listen anyway." Roman turned to face her fully, his dark eyes settling on her with the same unsettling focus he'd shown her in that first conference room meeting weeks ago. "You've looked like you were carrying something for days, Miss Okafor," he said quietly. "I was starting to wonder when you'd finally set it down." She told him everything in a rapid, breathless rush. The makeup case, the photographs, the scar that didn't match. The recording, the conversation she'd overheard in the garden, the name, Markovic, the plan for the toast at 7 o'clock. She braced herself for disbelief, for anger, for the possibility that he would simply have her escorted off the property for slandering his bride hours before the ceremony. Instead, something in his face went terrifyingly still. "Show me the photographs," he said. She handed him her phone with trembling fingers. He scrolled through the images slowly, his jaw tightening with each one. And when he reached the photograph of the scarred Catherine, the real Catherine, his expression turned into something Marigold had no name for: grief and fury, arriving in the same instant. "That's the woman I proposed to," he said softly, almost to himself. "That scar happened when we were 19, falling off her father's dock together. Nobody outside our two families even knows about it." He looked up at Marigold, and for the first time all morning, his composure cracked just slightly. "Where is she? Where is my Catherine?" "I don't know," Marigold whispered. "Whoever's wearing her face right now does." Roman didn't shout. He didn't break anything. He simply pressed 2 fingers against his temple, closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds, and then turned toward the estate with the kind of cold, focused calm that made the hair rise along Marigold's arms. "The wedding continues exactly on schedule," he said. "What? Mr. Esposito, you can't possibly mean—" "I mean every word of it." He was already walking, already pulling a phone from his jacket, his voice dropping into rapid, low instructions to someone on the other end about quietly repositioning security around the reception terrace without alerting anyone watching from outside. "She thinks she's still in control. I intend to let her keep believing that for exactly 6 more hours." The ceremony began precisely on schedule. Beneath a sky the color of pale gold, hundreds of guests filling white chairs along the lakeside terrace. Completely unaware, they were witnessing something other than what it appeared to be. The impostor walked down the aisle in Catherine's wedding dress, smiling the smile she had clearly rehearsed in front of mirrors for weeks, utterly convinced the day belonged entirely to her. Marigold stood near the back of the gathered crowd, hands clenched at her sides, watching Roman exchange vows with a stranger wearing his fiancée's stolen face, knowing exactly what was coming and unable to do anything but wait. The reception moved into the toast precisely at 7 o'clock, just as the recording had promised. Champagne glasses rose around the terrace, the warm evening light catching crystal and casting trembling gold reflections across the water. Roman lifted his own glass first, exactly as the impostor had predicted he would, and stepped toward her with the easy, practiced motion of a man about to seal his own destruction. Then he stopped 2 feet away from her, his glass still raised, and spoke clearly enough for the entire terrace to hear. "Before we drink to this marriage," he said, "I think everyone should know who they're actually toasting." The impostor's smile faltered for the first time all day. Roman nodded once toward the head of his security team, standing near the terrace doors. The man pressed something on a tablet, and the wide screen, set up for the evening's planned photo slideshow, flickered to life instead with something else entirely. Photographs Marigold had taken in the bathroom days earlier, enlarged for every guest to see. The real Catherine's scarred jawline beside the smooth, unscarred face of the woman currently standing at Roman's side in a wedding dress. A wave of confused murmurs rippled across the terrace. "No," the impostor said, her composure finally cracking, the cold voice from the recording bleeding through the rehearsed warmth for the first time in public. "This is absurd." "Roman, what is this?" "You tell me," Roman said, his voice carrying easily across the silent terrace. "Where Catherine Voss actually is right now. And maybe I let you live long enough to explain it to a judge instead of to me." The woman's eyes darted toward the terrace exits, finding Roman's men already stationed at every one of them. Panic replaced composure in an instant, the careful mask she had worn for weeks finally collapsing entirely. "Markovic has her," she admitted, her voice cracking. "She's alive. She's at the warehouse on Cermak. I swear, I was only supposed to stand in until the transfer of the port contracts went through. Nobody told me." "Nobody told you what?" Roman interrupted, his voice gone dangerously quiet. "That betraying a man at his own wedding usually ends badly for the person holding the knife." Security moved in before she could answer, and within minutes, she was gone from the terrace entirely, escorted away, while 200 stunned guests stood frozen amid champagne glasses nobody had actually drunk from. Roman didn't wait to watch her go. He turned immediately to his security chief, his voice already shifting into the clipped, efficient tone of a man preparing for war. Cermak warehouse. Now, bring her home. What followed happened too fast for Marigold to fully witness. A coordinated, silent operation that emptied half the estate's security detail within 20 minutes, leaving the reception terrace in a strange, suspended hush as confused guests slowly began gathering their things to leave. Marigold stood near the floral arch she had built with her own hands, watching the chaos settle into uneasy quiet, wondering if she should simply slip away unnoticed. She didn't get the chance. Just over an hour later, Roman returned to the terrace himself, his jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up, a faint trace of dried blood along one knuckle that he made no attempt to hide. Beside him walked a woman Marigold recognized instantly from the photographs, thinner than her pictures suggested, exhausted but unmistakably real, the faint scar along her jaw catching the terrace lights. The real Catherine Voss was home. Marigold watched from a distance as the two families reunited in stunned, emotional disbelief, watched Catherine's mother collapse into tears, watched Roman stand quietly to the side of it all, his attention drifting eventually across the terrace until it landed directly on Marigold. He crossed the space between them without hesitation. "You found something nobody else in this organization noticed in 3 weeks," he said. "Trained security, lawyers, family. None of them caught it. You did." "I just noticed things," Marigold said quietly. "It's not exactly a useful skill most days." "It saved my actual fiancé's life today," Roman said. "I'd call that useful." He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable shifting behind his dark eyes. "Why did you keep pushing to tell me, even when you had every reason to stay quiet and protect yourself instead?" Marigold thought about the answer for a moment, before giving it honestly. "Because I spent most of my life being the person nobody really looked at twice. I wasn't about to become the person who looked away when it actually mattered." Something in Roman's expression softened in a way she hadn't seen from him in 3 weeks of meetings and deliveries and careful professional distance. "Nobody's looking away from you now." 2 weeks later, the real wedding took place in a small, quiet ceremony at the same terrace overlooking Lake Michigan. This time, with the correct bride standing at the altar and a much shorter guest list. Marigold designed the flowers for that ceremony too, though Roman insisted on paying her 3 times the original contract for what he called, with a faint and genuine smile, services rendered well beyond the scope of floristry. Her shop, on the south side of Chicago, never struggled with rent again. Word of what really happened at the Esposito estate never made it into any newspaper that moved quietly through the right circles anyway, and within a year, Marigold's small flower shop had become the discreetly preferred florist for half the city's most powerful families, all of whom seemed to understand, without ever saying it directly, hiring her came with more than beautiful arrangements. She had spent her whole life being underestimated for the shape of her body instead of recognized for the sharpness of her attention. It took a stolen face, a kidnapped bride, and a wedding that never should have happened to finally prove which one actually mattered. Flowers at that altar told the truth long before anyone else did. Marigold Okafor had simply been the only person paying close enough attention to listen. If you were in Marigold's position, watching a secret unravel, one detail at a time, with everything to lose by speaking up, would you have trusted your own instincts as fast as she did, or would you have waited for more proof first? Drop your answer below, because we genuinely want to know how you'd have played it. And if this kind of slow burn reveal is exactly the kind of story you come here for, go ahead and follow the channel so you don't miss whichever secret unravels next.